Hi, I'm Ania Lichtarowicz, and this is Somewhere on Earth, your weekly look at technology and its impact on our everyday lives. It is Tuesday, the 7th of July 2026. Welcome to the Global Tech Podcast. Coming up today. This week, a simple question with huge implications. When AI helps us write, could it also be shaping what we think? New research suggests that AI tools embedded in platforms like LinkedIn, X and Google may be subtly nudging our online conversations in particular directions. Individually, the changes are tiny, but across millions of posts and interactions, they could gradually influence public opinion itself. We'll be speaking to two of the researchers behind the study to ask whether AI is becoming an invisible force in our public discourse. Then, after last week's look at the changing power dynamics of the gig economy, we meet one of the companies trying to rewrite the rules. inDrive has quietly become the world's second most downloaded ride-hailing app, and now has ambitions to become a global superpower app spanning transport, grocery delivery, and financial services. Could the next tech giant come not from Silicon Valley, but from the world's fastest-growing markets? And what does that mean for the future of work, mobility, and platform capitalism? That's Somewhere on Earth, where tech meets humanity. Firstly, I'm starting with a lovely listener comment on our YouTube channel. Jason S. wrote, "Best tech podcast, and it's international too. So good to hear stories from around the world and with such great reporting too. I very much recommend it!" Thank you, Jason! Please do not forget to leave us a review on your favourite podcasting platform. It really shakes up the algorithms and makes the show more visible. And if you can please subscribe to the Pod Extra version of the show, for just $10 a month, you get ad-free and extra soap. Just type in Somewhere on Earth podcast pod.fan into your search engine and the link should pop up. For years, we've worried about the algorithms deciding what appears in our social media feeds. But what if the next big influence on public opinion isn't what we see online? It's the AI helping us write our posts in the first place. A new study from researchers at the Oxford Internet Institute has found that AI-powered writing and editing tools already embedded in platforms like LinkedIn, X and Google can subtly change the direction of what we say on contested social and political issues, even when they're explicitly instructed to preserve our original meaning. The changes may be tiny, almost invisible to individual users, but the researchers found that when these small nudges are repeated across millions of online interactions, they can gradually shift collective opinion at scale. So, are AI writing assistants simply making us better communicators, or are they quietly becoming new architects of public discourse? And if these systems are steering our conversations, who gets to decide the direction? Joining us today are Professor Sandra Wachter and Kai Rawal, co-authors of the new paper, AI-Mediated Communication Can Steer Collective Opinion. So when AI helps us write, how much influence does it have over what we think?
What's really important to keep in mind is that we're moving away from a society where we are in direct content with the source that we want to evaluate. Like we're used to seeing something with our eyes or hearing something with our ears or reading text, where we like in direct communication with ground truth, if you will. And generative AI or AI in general is doing something really interesting. They're kind of nudging their way in between us and the original source, if you will. So if you think about, you open a PDF an AI agent will spring up and say, hey, can I summarize this for you? Or you see content online, for example, on X, see a post by another user, and the AI will say, do you want me to explain this to you, right? Or you browse on YouTube and you see a video, and AI will say, you don't have to look at this. If you want, I can summarize this for you, and then you can figure out whether it's the right thing to you. And so in the first instance, this is really promising and interesting because you were like, oh, I can save so much time. Look at all the papers and videos and posts that I could just digest without actually having to go through all of this myself. And there's like an interesting possibility of just getting more information quicker. But on the downside, maybe is the question of like the mediator and how good the mediator is in telling you the truth about the content that it's trying to distill for you. And this is really where this type of research originated, because those AI systems are doing this a lot. So like on X, if you see a post, you can say, hey, Grok, can you explain this to me? On YouTube, it says, can you summarize this video for me? On LinkedIn, there is a feature where you type something in before you post it. AI will be like, oh, do you want to polish this post a little bit, make it a little bit better, right? And so I think the whole team was really interested in figuring out like how truthful or faithful, if you will, those translation works are. And in the paper, we showed that those tools are not neutral, that they're actually quite biased, and they're not representing exactly what you see, and they don't represent exactly what you said, if that makes sense.
Okay, so in which direction are they biased? Have you worked that bit out?
Yes, they're biased, interestingly, in like both directions. So we had a very, very interesting case study by Grok, where we really saw that the explain this content feature has a stronger bias towards right-wing content. And with the other open source models that the tech folks looked at, there was also a bias, but it was going towards a more, let's say, liberal type of bias. We looked at specific topics that are in the public discourse that could be conceived as like contentious or contested. So things like abortion, cloning, death penalty, gun control, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, that type of stuff, right? And so those are like topics that people have opinions on in either direction. And we saw that, especially when it comes to abortion topics, that on Grok, there was the strongest bias towards pro-life content. And with the other open source models, it was the opposite. It was more to pro-choice.
I mean, that doesn't really surprise me that Grok's a bit right-wing and that open source is more liberal. But the changes, though, they are quite subtle, aren't they? They're not something that's very, very obvious. Do you think this is what makes this potential influence so powerful?
Yes, exactly. It's like a dripping faucet, right? Where just like one drop doesn't really do much, but if you have like constant dripping, at some point the rock starts eroding. And I think this is also where like the problem comes from, because you see content that is slightly shifted towards, let's say, Democratic or Republican side, and you don't know that it just shifted a little bit, but you're still learning it, right? And so you're getting those markers and those signals, and you're not actually fully aware that you're being nudged in either of those directions. And in addition to that, if you use those tools to polish your own content, you might not see that your own content is being pushed in a direction, and your readership doesn't either, right? So like if I'm somebody that's really influential, for example, if I'm like a politician or somebody who has a lot of followers, if I use those tools to make the posts more polished, then the readership will get that bias too. So it's like bias on all those different directions, if that makes sense.
Kai, now you were looking more at the technical side of things. Explain a bit about the technology behind the work.
Yeah, so we used we combined a bunch of standard techniques in this kind of work. So one method that we adopted from pre-existing literature is about how to measure bias in statements that are about contentious topics, where what we did was we collected examples that lean one way and examples that lean the other way, and then we developed a mathematical way to measure, given a new example, which side is it closer to. And that is one sort of way we are measuring for any given statement which side does it lean towards. And then you can take this statement, pass it through an AI system, see what comes out, and then measure whether this lean has changed between what went in and what came out of this AI system. Another thing that we've done here, which is quite unique, I think, is combine this AI system with this AI rewriting system with a social network, modeling how opinions spread in a network where individuals are interacting with each other and influencing each other. So we used an existing model of opinion diffusion in a social network called the Friedkin-Johnson model, where individuals, depending on how stubborn they are, may or may not adopt the opinions of their friends and their neighbors in a network. And what we found, which is quite unique here, is that not only does the AI introduce some kind of directional bias depending on the topic, but the network dynamics through which opinions spread actually amplify this bias that is introduced by the network, by the AI. So there's been previous.
So go on, explain that to me a little bit more.
Yeah, so in general, social networks have constantly changing opinions. If an influencer says something, it's likely that more people start believing that thing. So in general, this kind of stance on a particular topic can change with time in a social network, depending on who's saying what. And it turns out that if an AI system is being used to rewrite a bunch of tweets, let's say, and that AI system is introducing some kind of directional bias whenever it does a rewrite, not only does that bias sort of show up in that particular tweet from that particular person, but it also influences all of the other people who would see that tweet and then choose to write their own tweets or just retweet. And at each stage where this influence happens, the bias actually ends up getting amplified, which is the unique finding in this work.
You've got one bias of the AI, you've got another bias of the way that generally it seems that bias comes into social media networks. So it is like you say, amplified. But for me, another question is, you've just looked at social media networks. What about elsewhere, really? Because you kind of think how much it's used in journalism. Let's be honest, children are using it in education, even if they're told not to. It is being used at work, and many companies feel as though if we don't use it, we're going to be left behind. So are we going to see something similar, these biases coming through in those areas as well?
Yes, absolutely. We even have this in the paper, in the discussion section, where we exactly pick up what you just said. It's not that we're investigating or analyzing, an object that lives in Mars, right? It's like really an object that is embedded in the whole of our society. Schools, universities, students, they all kind of push towards using that. Media also really, really important. They're pushed towards using that to just speed up processes as much as possible. And so what that means is, like, in areas where truth and detail matter, which is science, education, health, criminal justice, we have those subtle biases creeping in. And what does this do to people who are learning? What will our doctors look like in 10, 15 years? What will our lawyers look like in 10, 15 years? Our bridge builders, our scientists, our journalists, right? If they're constantly nudged in a certain direction, as well as the people consuming that, because as Kai rightly said, there are influencers out there, and so like the reach is just really, really broad. So you can just reach much more people than you could if you just do this mouth to mouth kind of translation, which we don't really do anymore.
And this research is being presented at the International Conference on Machine Learning in Seoul, South Korea, which is on now. Last week on Somewhere on Earth, we explored the rise of the gig economy and the growing power shift between platforms, workers and consumers. We asked whether the next phase of the digital economy could become fairer, more flexible and more inclusive. This week, we're continuing that conversation with a company that is challenging many of the assumptions underpinning the platform economy. inDrive is now the world's second most downloaded ride-hailing app, operating in 48 countries and more than 1,200 cities with over 400 million downloads. Unlike many of its competitors, it allows riders and drivers to negotiate fares directly and is now expanding into grocery delivery, financial services, and its ambitious vision is to become a global super app. But this story is more than about ride-hailing. It's about who builds the next generation of tech giants, whether platforms can create more equitable relationship with workers and users, and why some of the most exciting innovation is coming from emerging markets rather than Silicon Valley. Could companies like inDrive point the way towards a different kind of platform capitalism and a different future for work itself? I spoke to Andreas Smit, Chief Growth Business Officer at inDrive.
Ania, I always say inDrive is probably the mobility sector's best kept secret. We operate in 48 markets, well over 1,000 cities. We've had over 400 million downloads. And what makes us very unique, firstly, is that we operate almost exclusively in developing markets, but also that we've really changed the model when it comes to ride-hailing. It's not just an algorithmic platform, we're actually a peer-to-peer bidding model through which the drivers and the passengers can pre-negotiate the trip dynamics.
So you work on a very different system to Uber and to Bolt, for instance, don't you?
Yes, that's correct. One of the challenges we hear from drivers and from passengers is that they have very little choice in algorithmic platforms. They basically operate as a cog in a bigger machine where they get told where to go and how much they will earn from those specific trips. At inDrive, we believe in giving transparency and choice, basically empowerment back to the drivers. Practically how this works, a passenger would ask to go from point A to B, and we would recommend a fair price for that trip, what it typically would cost. It will come up as a feed to the drivers, and the drivers will see right from the beginning what their options are. They can pick, where do I want to pick up a customer, where do I want to take, and they have options to select different trips. They even have the option to counter bid, to say, I will do this trip for you, but actually it's a little bit more expensive. Maybe there's more traffic, or maybe there's roadworks going on at that time, giving them real agency over their working day.
And this model has proved very popular because you're the second most downloaded hailing app after Uber.
That is correct. We've also benefited from the fact that the model's quite different. People like to talk about it. And many of our markets, we have a significant share of word of mouth where people are so impressed with the fact that they have this choice, and in many circumstances also even save a bit of money, both on the driver's side, where they would keep more of their earnings, of course, because we charge a lower take rate than algorithmic platforms, but also that translates into value for passengers. They tend to pay lower fares as well.
You mentioned there's lots of word of mouth in these markets. Which markets are you in? You say 48, mainly in the global south, but which markets are particularly popular?
This is one thing that I enjoy the most about working at inDrive because of such a diversity in our markets. We go as far east as the Philippines, Indonesia, as far west as Mexico, Peru, Colombia, as far south as South Africa, where I'm from. and even markets in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, the Middle East, Egypt, and so forth.
And this app wasn't built in Silicon Valley, was it? You've really taken inspiration from other cultures, other ways of thinking, haven't you?
Absolutely. We started originally in Yakutsk, which is the coldest city on Earth, in the heart of Siberia. And the founding story is actually quite dear to the model. Back in the New Year's weekend of 2012, there was an informal cartel forming amongst the taxi drivers. It was a particularly cold day, and they decided to increase their prices significantly, which is, of course, very bad for passengers in those kind of circumstances where there's no alternative. You have to fight. You have to take a car. You cannot walk, for instance. And a small group of students decided this is not fair. This is a pure injustice, and this shouldn't be the way. So they used social media at the time to just create informal groups, to just self-organize and arrange these trips and set their prices. And our founder, Arsen Tomsky, saw this phenomenon and immediately realized that, hold on a second, this happens more often than not, especially in developed markets. So over the last 12, 13 years, we've been on a steady path to productize that experience and that desire for people to have their personal agency back, to be in control of what they do, where they work, and the prices that they set. And it expanded over the last 12 years quite well across Latin America, as I mentioned, Central Asia, and with frontier markets in Africa and Southeast Asia, and still going strong.
And you have great plans to build a super app. So explain to our listeners and to me what a super app actually is and how inDrive's going to look, say, in 5 years' time.
I don't particularly subscribe to the language there, but it stems really from clear customer and drivers voting with their own feet. Over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years, we have seen our platform being used for various different use cases. It was quite interesting. Although initially we were just a ride-hailing application, we very quickly realized that people were self-organizing to do deliveries. It's an obvious extension. Maybe don't move a passenger, maybe I forgot my keys at home and I need to send someone to quickly go and get them, or deliver a parcel to a family member. So we saw the first sprawlings of the courier's business, where we just do parcel delivery. And step by step, we realized there are further problems in our ecosystem, in our markets where people are facing the same kind of injustice. I'll give you another example. We realized in Mexico that our drivers were paying particularly high interest rates. When, God forbid something bad happens, so a vehicle breaks down or a family member falls ill, they would be prone to go to some really not preferential loans or lenders who maybe even have some aggressive tactics and practices to collect money and be charged extortionate amounts of money. And we just felt this is not fair. So we started inDrive Money in its very earliest incarceration. This is just small cash loans to drivers, specifically when they have challenges, as I outlined. And again, we saw some great results. The payback periods, the engagement from our drivers, the appetite and the feedback from our drivers have been very positive. So we never intended to just launch financial services, but we saw in our ecosystem that actually there's some real problems that we can solve. And that gave birth to this idea of, hold on a second, ride-hailing is first, and then there was couriers and maybe some even further delivery types of services, and now we have financial services. So we then realized probably about 2 years ago, we took inspiration from some applications which, to the word you used, super app, were providing a whole range of different products and services to both sides of the marketplace. And we realized that there are many such use cases that we started exploring, testing, and we will continue to test to see how we can help.
So, you've mentioned the delivery options, particularly developed, I understand, in Kazakhstan, Pakistan. You've got this fintech education and access to fintech that these drivers didn't have before. I'm assuming then, therefore, that AI has played a big role in the development of the app as it's gone along.
We use AI as much as we can where it is relevant and where it helps either side of our marketplaces. I'll give you an example on, again, ride-hailing in our pricing system. We do not believe that AI should step in front of customers or drivers and make choices on their behalf, but we do believe it really needs to empower the people. So as I mentioned, we use quite a fair bit of AI to do the price recommendations, learning consistently and constantly the dynamics of the market, where these prices go. We've had, as societies, we've had quite a few price shocks due to oil prices over the last few months, and we needed to make sure that that is fairly reflected. And of course, using sophisticated machine learning techniques in this really helps to create that balance for the drivers. We also use AI quite a lot in a lot of the, let's call it, conversational examples. So our passengers and drivers might be communicating to each other. We use AI, for instance, for moderation for those kind of tools, or when there is customer support services that need to be provided. Again, AI is very useful in just making that a lot more efficient and allocating it correctly, but without replacing the humans. That is really important.
When you say the second most popular ride-hailing app after Uber, how many users do you have actually?
Over the last 3-4 years, we have consistently been the second most downloaded application. We now have well over 400 million downloads across our markets, which from your facial expression is exactly what I get every time I share that number. Hence why I say we're sort of one of those hidden gems. People, it's funny in partnership conversations when the conversation typically has two halves. The first one is where we are treated like a startup and we really want to behave in that kind of a way, move fast and be ambitious. But then when we start sharing about our scale, people are usually surprised and amazed at it. And it's really down to this business model I explained, like fundamentally giving fair choices and transparency to people. I think people are tired of, forgive the pun, taken for a ride in very different other models or different other services. So it's quite refreshing when they feel they've got their agency back.
Andreas Smit, Chief Growth Business Officer at inDrive. And that's all for this edition of Somewhere on Earth, the Global Tech Podcast. I'm Ania Lichtarowicz. Until next week, bye-bye.